Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today on this Wednesday night series called the Lighthouse Series. Now, today's topic is something that you guys asked for. It is feeling alone in a crowd. Now, this is a growing phenomenon across the world. I'm so glad you requested it. And I want to start this off with a story. This is a true story, and it is from right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we have something called the San Francisco Zen Hospice. And there is a man who's been serving there for a number of years. His name is Salam Khalili. Now, Salam Khalili is a Palestinian man in his 50s. One day when he sat down to have lunch, to take a break, he was joined by a popular Buddhist teacher in this area by the name of Jack Kornfield. So Jack didn't know Salam till that moment, and he sat down with this person, and just sitting next to each other, you have this conversation at lunch. So he said, who are you? Where are you from? And Salam introduces himself, says that I'm from Palestine. And to that, Jack asks him this question. He says, I've not seen too many people in the hospice circuit. What brings you into this realm of work? Now, for those of you who don't know what hospices are, it's where people are taken to in their very end of their life. It's palliative care, and it's a place where when the family feels that they cannot give to the needs of these people who are in their years of passing, or in their maybe sometimes weeks, sometimes it's days, it's very usually short amount of time. It's that institution where you take them to. And usually it's very, it's a very holistic, it's very loving, it's very spiritual environment. So anyway, so these two gentlemen are having this conversation, and Jack is obviously surprised that this Palestinian immigrant, who usually, they try to go and find a career that is a little bit more money-making, and he's the wisest man doing service. Good question. So, Salam responds by saying that it's because I want people to feel that this process of passing is okay. And he says, okay, now how did you come upon that realization? Salam says, I got a story. I have a personal incident that changed my life, which brings me to this work. So he goes on to tell the story that in 1967, when there's the movement to the establishment, there was a war going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's just when the country was divided and there was this struggle going on. And in that time, Salam was a journalist fighting for the rights of the Palestinians. And he was writing reports, writing lots of articles, doing a lot of reporter work. And then he used to constantly get arrested because of his work. So this off and on, he kept getting in and out of prison. This over a period of time, it was total cumulative of 7 years that he has been in prison. So he goes on to tell the story about this one particular episode, the last of his many imprisonments, where he's in prison, and there are generally lots of reasonable guards, but there's this one Russian guard who was there, who was particularly challenging him, because now he goes on to say that that particular guard was a Russian engineer who had a job as an engineer in Russia, but then when the country broke up, when they had the turmoil, so he migrated here as part of the creation of the Jewish state. He moved here, and he could not find a job equivalent to his career and his talent, and he ended up getting this thankless job of being a night shift guard, which made him very angry. And as he was very angry with what he was doing, it made him very mean. It came out as being very mean to those people who were prisoners. So one night, that guy, the Russian guard, is making his rounds, and he comes by Salam's cell, and he asks him something, and then Salam replies, and the guard is not happy with the response. So he pulls him out of the cell at that night and starts beating him with that iron rod and starts kicking him. He starts kicking him with a steel toe boot, and at some point, Salam loses consciousness and he feels like he's leaving this body. And later on, he goes on to read the police report of what actually happened, and they had actually declared him clinically dead at that point. So Salam noticed himself hovering to the ceiling of this jail, looking down at this episode very peacefully. That guy's kicking the body that's already, the soul is departed, blood spewing out of his mouth. And then he stops and he tells Jack, something then interesting happened. As you can imagine, now Jack is even more engrossed into the story. So he tells him, at one moment when he's there hovering up by the ceiling, looking down at this episode, there's a sudden pop. And that pop is a release of himself from his identity. And he feels like he is now one with everything. Everything is him, and he's one with everything. He says, that green paint that's on the cell wall that's peeling, he's part of it. That metal rod with which that body is being beaten, he's part of it. That body that is being beaten is part of it. That steel toe shoe that's kicking, he's part of it. That sheep that's on the meadow outside bleating is part of it. And then he doesn't remember what happens, but what he does remember is that 2 days later, he wakes up in his jail cell, hurting extremely badly. And it takes him a long time to recover. But then he goes on to say that when he does recover, something has fundamentally shifted in his life. And now when he's out of the prison, he no longer wants to fight for the rights of the Palestinians. That whole strife makes no sense to him anymore. What does make sense to him, he says, that he goes on to marry a Israeli Jewish woman and has kids who are now Palestinian Israeli kids, children. And then he goes on to become an artist, a healer, a social worker. And he says, since that time, he has decided to dedicate his life to help people in that mode of the transition, to sit by their side and let them know it's okay to die. It's completely fine. It's completely safe. So folks, when I heard this story, I was asking myself, who am I really? And how did I get here? How did we get here as a human race with all of this divisiveness, with all of the schisms, with this identity of I, me, myself? And then how can we help to educate one another to reestablish that sense of connection that is actually truly inherent part of us that we will not sometimes realize until we have left this body, when it's probably too late to be able to do something about it or to do something with that body of wisdom. And so as I sit with that question of who am I really and what is my sense of identity, then I realize that this thinking mind, this creation of this ego that emerges from the thinking mind, where I have established my sense of identity of who I am, what are my qualifications, what is my net worth, what belongs to me, etc., is really the myth that is woven in the web of your mind that creates that separation. And in that separation, there is a suffering because we are constantly trying to get away from that loneliness that we have created. It doesn't truly exist. It's not a natural intrinsic part of our being. Nothing but a figment of my own imagination. And from the shadows of that imaginary sense of self, I'm constantly trying to escape. I'm constantly trying to avoid that confrontation with this sense of loneliness, the sense of separation that I've created. And in the process of trying to escape from that loneliness, I find myself further and further actually going deeper into the distress, which is nothing but loneliness. So being alone is something more than just being with yourself and with those who are like you. Now, speaking out to the wind, speaking to the river that's passing, somehow helps us to bond with this greater sense of self, this vast, unlimited part of me. And it's a way of looking up from the day's shuffle and talking to the larger world. And instead, we spend our times flicking through social media, flicking through creating that sense of connection through these devices, where actually, if you think of it, it is this looking for this through the devices that's actually creating further a gap between me and everything that I am connected with. Now, there is a difference between loneliness and being alone. One is something that we try to escape from, but there is something that calls us to want to be with that complete integrated part of ourselves. And so when we try to make that journey, that ultimate journey, which is to discover how much our hearts can encompass, our capacity to cause suffering as well as to heal suffering, they actually live side by side. And when we can open our hearts to be able to hold everything around us and challenge ourselves that all life is our responsibility, not just some life, not just people who look like me, not just people who talk like me, just who live around me or my species. But when we can enlarge our heart, open our hearts to a point where we can encompass every life on earth. And our hearts have that capacity. We have that ability. At that point, we will learn what it means to heal. Not just somebody else. It's not about healing something else out there. Yes, that too. But more importantly, healing oneself. Healing oneself from the schisms, the divisions that I have broken my consciousness down, which of course then reflect in my connection, my schisms and consciousness with everything else and everybody else around us. And I tell you what, folks, there are forces out there that invest vast sums of resources, time, money, energy, etc., into feeding off of that division, feeding off of that confusion, that schism, that brokenness within us, to deepen those crevices such that they can have a sense of advantage, divide and conquer, as you might have heard. So if we want to see ourselves, if we want to see our world, our society, our community, whatever that range of your interest is, healing that schisms starts from within. It's not something that happens when somebody else is elected, something else comes into power, something else out there changes. It's really about our ability to take oneself inside and realize who we are and everything that is mine. When I say everything is mine, everything, all life on this planet is deeply connected with my own well-being. As I shine, everything else is affected and vice versa. So I was talking about this idea of loneliness and aloneness, right? Now, if you want to look at it, loneliness is a result of influence of something from outside, and oneself being so malleable and easily shaped, so the one under the influence of something else, under the shadow of something, a cloud that has come about in the open sky that doesn't allow the sunlight to come to me. Whereas aloneness is the opposite, is not being under any influence. It's complete freedom from all influence. It's influence from your wife, from your husband, from your church, from your ideology, from even the unconscious mind. And from that state of being free, there is a sense of aloneness. And in that freedom, it's a freedom from the known. Sit with that for a second. Aloneness is complete freedom, including freedom from the known. And in that complete openness, there's a sense of being able to receive, a sense of being able to learn, which then comes with the understanding of the totality of life. In that state where I'm completely have quietened my mind, my arrogance of saying I understand, when I drop that, in that silence, in that quietness, I'm able to perceive the magic machinery of life on earth, life in this universe, how everything comes together, how everything works. And that discipline that requires a certain discipline. This is not the kind of discipline that you get at a church or in the army or while you're training for the Olympics or on a particular skill. No. It is a discipline that comes out of a deep sense of humility. And there cannot be humility if there's no aloneness. So you see how this is like a chicken and egg kind of situation. Aloneness facilitates the realization of sense of self and the humility. And that humility is the discipline that helps us to forge that integrated sense of self, which is very different than accepting blindly something that has been told to you by someone, some institution, some culture, etc. So to walk alone, unimpeded by thoughts, by the trail of our desires, is to go beyond the reaches of the mind. So where even the thought patterns, the identification with something, you're going beyond all of that. And in the mind that isolates, separates, and cuts us off from the community. So it's this mind that's actually getting in the way of me and the divine. If you don't understand or if you cannot relate with the word divine, just even look at it from yourself to your higher self. And the noise, the identification with I, me, myself, is that barrier, is that boundary that is creating a sense of separation between you and that supreme intelligence. The mind cannot be made whole. It cannot make itself complete, for that very effort is a process of isolation, is a part of the loneliness that nothing can cover. The mind is the product of many, and what is put together can never be alone. Aloneness is a result of thought. It's not a result of identification. It's a result of having complete quietness, complete stillness of the mind. Only when thought is utterly still can there be the flight of the alone to the alone. This is a beautiful phrase from J. Krishnamurti, where he says, meditation is the flight from the alone to the alone that comes from complete stillness of the mind. And in that state of communion with your higher self or the divine, there is this ultimate realization, which is also really the fundamental realization that essentially I am love. And so what stands in the way of me always realizing that I am love? Thought, identification, the mind, ideas. So if you ever find yourself lonely, embark on this journey of disidentifying with everything that you think is me, mine, or my sense of self. And you'll start to quieten into that place. It can be quite uncomfortable to begin with, but really it is the only way to create that integrity, that integration between what is truly you, which is everything is connected. So now that is the ultimate practice. But now I'm going to share with you a few more tips that can be made actually quite easy, because you see, this is an age-old. See, spirituality, meditation is nothing new. It's one of the oldest practices known to mankind, and yet human beings suffer. They struggle to sit down with themselves and being able to quieten that monkey mind. It's one of the oldest, but at the same time, one of the most difficult and least understood disciplines in the world. We understand that. So let me share with you certain things that will help you and maybe help you to help other people in your family, your loved ones, that who are struggling with this idea of loneliness, because you see, loneliness is on a global rise. So I came from, my alma mater is the University of Texas at Austin. It is the largest university campus in the United States, 52,000 students. And I read a report that says Austin, which is where the city is, where the university's campus is based, is the country's leader in loneliness. Out of the 20,000 people who were polled, half of them are suffering from some form of loneliness. And particularly the ones that are suffering the most are this thing called the Gen Z, between 18 and 23 years of age. And then I come from India, the second largest population in the world. So it's got, you see, it's nothing to do with the number of people around you. India is crowded all the time, everywhere. Okay? With 1.3 billion people, the country is quite bustling. And yet 1 out of 12 people complain about loneliness. They're suffering from that. In the UK, there's an entire minister that has been appointed because 12% of Brits are suffering from loneliness. Japan it's even worse, generations of loneliness. So now let's talk about some very simple tips that you can put in your back pocket and say, if I find myself, I see somebody who's suffering from this loneliness, what are some easy ways to work myself towards a sense of integration that I talked about? Number one, find 15 minutes a day. No more. 15 minutes a day to find, you make a connection with somebody that you can talk to and reflect about the good things that happen in the day. Now, whether it's in person, whether it's on the phone, pick your own flavor. Now, second thing is when you are spending time with this person, even those 15 minutes, it's not about the quantity, but the quality of the time. Let it be undivided attention, where you're completely present in listening to this person share. Folks, I tell you, the concept of just being present is healing in itself. You don't need to do anything else. And actually, I want you to do nothing else. You see, it's very easy when you're hearing somebody share what happened in their day to quickly be the trouble fixer, the mechanic that says, okay, let's go sort this out. No, 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 no. Just be. Just hold space and listen. And you'll see the person who's sharing and the one who's receiving, it's therapeutic for both of you. And the third tip I give you is that engage in service. We are all blessed with something, some gift, some skill, some talent. We all have something that we can offer to the world, big or small. Find a way to give it away without any expectation. There was actually a study done again here in the Bay Area, returning war veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, who they come back with this heavy dosage of PTSD. And what was very interesting in this particular research was found is that when these PTSD afflicted vets go to volunteer to help children, young people, at-risk youth, who are also going through PTSD because of their community, the circumstances, because of their violent neighborhoods, etc. When somebody who's suffering from a trauma seeks out some energy from within themselves and finds a way to share something from what they have learned, something from their suffering in a way to uplift somebody else, their PTSD is healed. So there's a lot of science behind the gift of generosity, the gift of service. So find even the smallest ways in which you can go touch the lives of somebody else who may not be able to ever do something back for you. So folks, with that, I'd like to turn this discussion into a somatic exercise, and I want you all to drop into your body. So I want you to first lift up your arm. I'm picking up my right arm. You can do the same, or if you want to mirror me. And I want you to give it a nice stretch as you're leaning that arm over your head to the opposite side, feeling a nice big stretch in the muscles below your armpits. Making sure as you're doing this that you're keeping your neck loose and your other arm is rested. And as you bring yourself back straight up, lift up the opposite arm, in this case, my left arm, and I stretch it to the right. Getting a nice extension in my lats. Keep the breathing going as you're doing this. So as you lift up, breathe in. And as you stretch, as you bend to a side, breathe out. Breathe in as you're coming up. And as you raise and lift to the push to the other side, breathe out. Let's do this one last time on either side. Breathing in and nice stretch. Breathing out. Coming back up and in. And then breathing out. Getting one last final big stretch. I come back to the straight upright position, and I want you to keep your eyes open or closed as you see fit. And now let's drop it from the body into the heart space. Sitting down comfortably with my shoulders relaxed, my jaw unclenched, with my brow released. I drop into my body using breath as an anchor. With each passing breath, I collect my attention and bring it inwards. As I'm breathing in, I focus my attention to what's happening in here, while I was focused for a long time on what was happening out there. Gradually shifting this focus. I want you to pay attention to how the air is passing in and out of your body. Notice, for example, that the air enters the nostrils as a cool, fresh air, creating a sensation of coolness as it enters into the nostril, goes up, and then turns around, goes down the windpipe, and fills the very bottom of the lungs. And notice as you exhale, the body releases what it does not need, which comes out as a warm breath. I want you to focus particularly on one area, which is that inflection point where the air goes up the nasal passage and turns around and goes down the windpipe. Just at that inflection point, which is called the bridge of the forehead. Now imagine this area to be the seat of consciousness, the seat from which I experience things. I listen, I smell, I taste, process the sensation of touch. This is also the area where all thought processes happen. It is also the area where memories are kept. Now imagine the seat of consciousness to be like a spark of light, a cool, irradiant light. Now imagine that this light is something you can shine to any specific part of the body, and you can direct it any which way you like. I start by directing it towards my brain, the grayish-white matter above, towards the top of the head. This light fills and surrounds the brain. Now let this light be shown towards the eyes, the eyeballs from behind and all around. Send it towards the cheek, both sides, the nose, the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the chin. Then over to the right ear, back of the head, to the left ear, until your entire head space is filled with this cool white light. Now let's send this light consciously down through the throat passage into the chest region. Touching the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the stomach, the liver, the intestines, all the way down to the pelvic region. Now from the pelvic region, let this light just go down the left leg, starting from the hips, down through the thighs, to the knee, to the shin, the ankle, the foot and toes. Now, send this light down from the hip just through the right leg, through the thigh, the knee, the shins, the ankle, the foot and toes. Now starting from the shoulders, just the left shoulder, send this light down just the left arm, through the upper arm, to the elbow, through the forearm, through the wrist and the tips of the fingers. And from the right shoulder, let it go down the right arm, to the elbow, forearm, wrist, and tips of the fingers. If your mind ever gets distracted and gets carried away in any which way, just use breath. Taking a deep breath and gently bring your attention back to this process. At this point, your entire body suit is filled with white light. Now imagine this light emerges through the skin as a radiance, creating an aura all around your body, about 1 foot from the skin, in all directions, front, back, left, right, above, below. Now, this radiance, this aura on the outside protects the body from any external harm. And the light inside your body, underneath the skin, it heals. Now, gradually, I want you to increase this aura to encompass one person closest to you physically. That could be somebody in your house or some neighbor. But extend your aura to include one other being. Now see if you can extend that further to include members of your family and relatives, perhaps. Now try to see if you can extend that further to include colleagues or classmates, whatever the case might be, people that you engage with during the day. Now see if you can extend the aura to include everybody in your community where you live. See if you can extend it out further to the entire city or the county, whatever's appropriate for you. Now, extend that awareness to include everybody in your state. See if you can extend that to include everyone in your country. And then let's try to include everyone on this planet, Earth. And while we're at it, let's include all species, not just humankind. And then ask yourself this question: how do I feel right now? And then, can I feel my deep connection with all beings right now? Is there any room for loneliness in this state? At your own pace, I want you to come back to this circle. If you had your eyes closed, I'd want you to please open them up at your own speed. And I want you to please share what came up in those three questions. How do you feel? Do you feel a sense of connection? Can there be loneliness in this state? And I'm seeing responses like, no, I don't feel any loneliness. And while the answers are being typed in, I'm just going to go ahead and say that this experience that we heard of Salam Khalili, it's not a unique one. If you all have studied or had any personal encounters with near-death experiences, there's lots of literature out there. There's a particular scientist that I encourage if you want to read more and see other similar studies. His name is Dr. Raymond Moody, Moody. And Dr. Raymond Moody, that was his life's work, to interview people who had these things called NDEs, near-death experiences, or OBEs, outer-body experience, usually as a result of some sort of trauma, some sort of an accident, etc. And then he would record their narration of what they'd experienced in that interval that they were clinically declared dead. And when they did come back, what was the experience in that period? And it's interesting, he's done this study across nations, across cultures, across genders, ethnicities, etc. So it's not just tainted by any particular one school of thought or one philosophy. And it's remarkable to see how similar all of those stories were to each other and the inferences you can make with what Khalili has shared with us. Okay, so I'm seeing other things like I'm feeling blissful, connected to all living beings. I never feel lonely. Okay, that's beautiful, folks. Who did you feel most connected with during your ashram life and now? That's a great question. So I felt a natural connection with the Supreme Being, a natural affinity. It's almost like something that was a long lost, now found recognition. You know, the soul, first of all, when the first time I remember having this experience, I was sitting in this, there was something called the World Meditation Hour. So every third Sunday, the Brahma Kumaris, which is the organization that I practice and learn studying meditation with, they used to do this thing called World Meditation Hour, where they would synchronize and have a world meditation. That means they had the centers around the world. In this particular hour, they would see it be different times, obviously different countries. They would sit down and they would meditate for an hour, and that was their donation for world peace. And that was a beautiful entry for me to come into that kind of a circle for my very first long meditation. And I remember very profoundly this sense of feeling myself as the soul. And it was so unique and so refreshing on one side, but also felt so real, so appropriate, that that's who I am. And it's not this thing, this image that changes shades and colors and grows old and wrinkles and this and that, which I see in the mirror, which is what, before that, that was my sense of identity of, what I see is who I know myself is what I see in the mirror. So once I went through that first realization of me being the soul, then comes the next thing. When you're freed up from this consciousness, the limitation of this body and this everything, the constructs that we limit ourselves by, when we say that I'm Indian, I have, this particular degree, this and that, you go beyond that, then you are in a realm where you have access to this, just like you are a soul, to the supreme soul, the parent, the supreme parent of all of us. And that felt so natural and so empowering. And this particular connection, I'll tell you this specific episode. I remember I was still in college. So I took the meditation course in India, but I was still in University of Texas, UT, as I told you earlier in the story. And I remember that the teacher from the center in Hyderabad, where I took the course, she gave me a cassette tape. So this is now, we're talking 96, 97. So cassette tapes were still around back then. So it was early in the morning, perhaps somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m. It's still dark. It was winter. It was somewhere like either February or March, the month. And I popped the cassette tape in. I woke up. I remember it was cold. I put a blanket on myself. I sat down because I wanted to experience this early morning meditation that they talk about. So in the meditation, the guided commentary went something like, okay, I'm a soul, I'm beyond this physical body, matter. I can, lift into a different higher realm. And then it talked about the supreme soul and connection and so on. And some minutes had passed and something happened. I felt like I was completely outside this body. I was in the state of great sense of clarity where I could see all of life in complete, vivid perspective. It's like there was no confusion. There was no doubt. There was no worries. There was nothing to be concerned about. It's a complete sense of, I guess what the alcoholics call it, that moment of clarity when they've had a little too much. And I was sitting here like, in my college room and having this experience. And anyway, so I don't know how long that experience lasted, but when I did come back into this body, I felt every pore of my body was oozing with energy. And then the first thought that came across my mind was, well, people do drugs and alcohol for this kind of a trip, and I'm doing this just by thinking? I said, this stuff is amazing. I've got to dig into this some more. And I'm telling you this story after all these years, because that was the first time I felt like, deeply connected with something higher than myself, outside of myself. And there's no looking back. And that's kind of been a pivotal moment. Folks, with that, I've noticed that we've run out of time. Thank you very much for your engagement. Great topic you suggested. So keep those topics coming. And I will see you all again soon. Until I see you next week, same time, same place. I want you all to be happy. I want you all to be safe. And I want you all to be well. Thank you.